hand for you.
Nice.
And bear with me. David has put this on a very, very long stick that's measured for his height for pausing, but I think I'm just going to come and give you the back view. And I'll just keep apologizing for my shaky, no tripod.
Oh, that's all right. It looks fine actually. The way the phone picks it up is good because it you don't see it compensates for the shaking.
Oh, awesome. And actually very fitting. I shouldn't say no tripod because actually I do have a tripod and it's a bamboo stick from the garden. So how fitting is that?
Good. That was from the original bamboo, probably from like 20 whenever that was, 20 years ago, 2002, I think, or 2003. I can't remember when we planted the bamboo, but that's actually an unusual bamboo. Some of them are anyways. So that's great that they're, oh yeah, look at that. They're looking great. It's nice to see.
Yeah, and so that new table that came in place of the boxes that you probably remember that were kind of aging infrastructure.
Yeah.
Those were replaced when we got our new staircase.
Well, that's amazing. The staircase just cracks me up. People have told me about it, and you know, it used to be. You remember the sort of path, the sort of bandit path.
Yes.
And then back in the day, people used to hang glide, you know, until the city sadly put a fence at the bottom of the hill. But it used to be a place where people would practice hang gliding. It's just, I mean, well, one guy, anyways, he used to be there from time to time. So, but then they spoiled his fun. And then there was also the one sort of tobogganing spot in East Vancouver that was reliable.
Yes. And it's still a huge tobogganing spot. That's still pretty classic that everybody is tobogganing there.
No,
but the
great.
other thing that we'll see a little bit later on, but as you look at the garden, there's this cut of land, this swath that's kind of a pie shape between where the staircase is and what had been the garden edge. I'm going to just lift my phone and hopefully you kind of get a little bit of a sense of that. So that is now actually an addition to the garden.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so nice. The garden has increased. It's quite a large section of space that we just started planting in a couple of years ago.
Wonderful.
But yeah, before we kind of officially begin, and I heard a ding, so somebody else has joined us. Welcome. And yeah, there's the willow at the entrance, the bamboo, raised beds. Still the same garden shed. To my thinking, we've got now probably at least 2 skunk families that live underneath it.
Wow, that's really something. And affordable housing.
Yeah,
and the block
totally.
is still there, means of production. That was just the sort of landmark, I guess. Great.
And there is the means of production lodestone, as it were, that has means of production carved on the side. I'm not sure if that shows.
Yeah,
I could give it a good scrub for the 20th anniversary.
Yeah. Or originally we were going to put some paint in the letters. We never did do that, but you know, because it would just basically eventually oxidize out. But feel free to rub some black paint in there if you want to bring out the means of production. But the subtlety is nice too. It's really just it's you know, it's such a great object really, because so many people have sat on it and you know dealt with their various biomaterials. You know, so it's and it's local stone.
You know, right now it's got sidewalk chalk drawing on it that people have done. It's got an iPhone that I found in the garden bed, so it kind of acts as our lost and found in the community.
That's great.
And yeah, there's constant gatherings of people in this top area.
That's
and again, I just want to show you this front sidewalk has changed so radically over the years.
Wow.
We had Robin Ripley was a artist here for a number of years. She worked with us, just really, she's, you know, really avid gardener and also an artist that works with natural materials. And she joined us to just take on getting low maintenance plantings in this front bed that would give us kind of a nice sidewalk appeal.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's nice, yeah.
So Robin's life has taken her in other directions. She hasn't had the capacity to be with us, but we are still, loving so many of the plants that she introduced us to. And this apple tree now is massive.
Wow, look at that. That's huge.
It's huge. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but the fruit trees were really kind of left untended for about a 4-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just, I think, year 3 of getting them back into some shape. So
nice.
Anyway, we took out some big chunks through the center, and we're getting kind of a goblet return now on the apple, and it's also shading out that top area a bit less.
Great.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to just swing back around, and I'm going to figure that those people that are joining us have joined us, and I'll stop and pause here for a moment.
Cool, and we are recording, so we can always share the video to the wider world.
Awesome. That's perfect. Great. Okay, so I want to just begin now formally and say welcome everybody and Oliver Kellhammer to the Means of Production Garden. We are on the traditional and unceded lands of the Homuquim, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, who have been the land tenders here since time immemorial. And these stolen lands that we now call Vancouver, we are situated, Means of Production, on the south edge of an area called traditionally Squamish, which means hole in bottom. It's an intertidal marsh zone that became the spot for the infill when the train was coming through. And so as we're walking down the hillside on this tour, you can think about how that hillside would have originally been a steep bank coming down to what is now Great Northern Way, a main artery, which is the infill of what had been the marsh. Ian Campbell from the Squamish Nation refers to this area in the marsh zone as being the community's grocery store. So this would have been traditionally this lush, beautiful place for hunting, for foraging, for gathering. There were land tenders that were here. We don't have the contact of who those people are. And so what we're looking at now is essentially not even a blink of an eye of time that has transpired since Oliver started this garden in 2002. And here we are in 2022. And my name is Sharon Kallis. I have been honored and very privileged to be one of the primary tenders of this site since 2007. So I started in this garden. I knew what dandelions were. I knew very little else. And my entire art practice has really been shaped, Oliver, by the opportunities that this garden has provided for me. So I'm going to just, and David Gowman, my partner and the other primary lead here in the garden. It's been 15 years that we've now been here. Thank you, Oliver. I'm just going to keep saying over and over again what a huge impact you've had for David and myself in our art practice. When I think back in the 15 years that I've been here now, I started here in 2007. I was working with Park Board Green Waste, and I didn't have any community in the arts. I didn't feel like my art belonged anywhere, or there was any place of peers that I could connect or relate to. And when Jill Weaving told me about this garden, and I came and began learning alongside Environmental Youth Alliance, who were Oliver's partners in starting the garden, and were the initial tenders and stewards of the space, I began learning so much, and I'm shocked when I think now of how big the community is of people who are doing so much artwork, where this garden and now other gardens are the means of their creative production. And so we're not just growing materials here. It sounds really corny, but we are actually growing community in the most incredible, nourishing of ways. So yeah, if I could if I could change something in how grants are offered and in how we have to note take and report, the notion of being able to go and do a final report 20 years on where we can actually speak to the breadth of a project, because all of this is about time, right? So thank you, Oliver, for everything, your distance of thinking of long-term scale of planting for the future, everything that you were considering back in 2002, which is so much now a part when we think of supply chains and where materials come from, all of those conversations that the rest of the world seems to be catching up with now. You were on that 2 decades and more ago. So I raise my hands to you. Thank you.
That's very sweet of you, Sharon. Thank you so much. But as you said, it really was a group effort, as these projects always are. You know, I was one of the co-founders of Cottonwood. So this project, in a way, was an outgrowth of Cottonwood Gardens. So yeah, for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name's Oliver Kellhammer. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Lenni-Lenape people here on the banks of the East River in good old NYC, the place so nice. They named it twice. It's really hot here. It's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit and really polluted. But you know, I live here now mostly. So but what a wonderful introduction, Sharon. And I know David is leaping around the garden with his instruments. So just by way of, you know, I'm so happy the way that this project has been so well, not just taken care of, but like evolved. I mean, it really what the EYA and I did back in the day in 2002 was create a scaffold, right? And from that point on, people like Sharon and David and many others have extended that scaffold into the far reaches of possibility and you know, built this community around this little sort of grain of dust that it was when we started. And so a little history, this was one of the, I think it was the first project of the Art and Environment program that the folks at the Park Board had thought of. So there was Jill Weaving and was her name Susan Gordon, I believe. I can't remember. There's a bunch of others. They conceived of this idea of having artists do stuff in the parks, right? And so I remember them saying, "Don't make another garden, you know, like you and your gardens," right? So like in those days, they wanted some art, but I made the case that this would be a ongoing piece of community land art that people would hopefully participate in and change over time. So it functions as a piece of public art in a sense, but it's also true to its name, the means of production, going back to old Karl Marx. I think this is probably the only monument to Karl Marx in Vancouver that I know of. So the thought there was, you know, we'd been getting some expertise in East Van about growing food. And, you know, places like Strathcona Gardens, Cottonwood Gardens, which I was part of, they were kind of a really sort of forward-thinking projects in a sense to grow food and also create kind of green space that's not about just sort of sterile green space, but more participatory green space. So means of production came about with that in mind, that, wow, we're sort of doing food, but why don't we think about materials? So I remember having these great conversations with the Environmental Youth Alliance, who were very active in those days. And the idea that we could close the supply chain. So to have, instead of like, you know, killing old growth forests on Vancouver Island to get wood, wouldn't it be nice to grow sort of microforestry, you know, wood and bamboo and paper making and dye making and all of that in a park, right? So the park was chosen because it was kind of an abject space. If you go onto my website, oliverk.org, there's like a whole history of it there. And it was kind of an abject hillside. And it was really just a place where people would, basically throw their dog shit. And the hill was very compacted. So the city was having a hard time maintaining it, the lawnmowers, the ride-mowers. It was kind of risky being on a slope. You can imagine that's pretty scary. And then there was also runoff problems. So a lot of water went down off the hill, down onto Great Northern Way, creating flooding, right? So I offered to kind of fix that using permaculture techniques. And so the EYA and I got busy and started digging trenches, planting willows, and then the rest is kind of history. It just kept evolving and evolving. The EYA had quite a few collaborators at first. Many First Nations people came forward, and the garden grew to incorporate a First Nations plant zone. And then there were some fruit people came and planted fruit trees. And then it just got bigger and bigger. And then at that point, I left. On good terms, I just had to go on to do other projects. And then Sharon and David really took the lead and made this project into what it is today, I can pretty much say, along with all the amazing people who participated. And so the thought was, again, to have a landscape that could be run like as the commons in the way that First Nations people did and traditionally cultures have done all over the planet. Oh, there's a question. Is there a question there, Alana? No? Oh, she's just waving. Okay, all right. Feel free to throw it in the chat or just shout out to me. So the idea is that you could have a space in the city that wasn't about just capitalism. Like people could participate and grow things that they needed. Being, if you're a craftsperson or an artist or somebody who makes crazy wooden horns, there was a place to do that. And so in a way, it was like a materials supply depot, but you had to participate. You had to help grow stuff and take care of it and prune it and harvest it. So the idea was that it was a tended landscape by the people who participated, right? So that could be anyone who wanted to put time in. And the neighborhood there, traditionally, it probably changed now, but when we started, it was very much a neighborhood where a lot of folks who were recent immigrants landed. There was still some cheap apartments around there. And so a lot of folks that was the first place they lived when they got to Vancouver. And so we had very interesting discussions with people from all over the world who would immediately understand what we were trying to do, and who had some, lived connection to sourcing materials like basket willows and whatnot, and either got involved or really were just happy to be in a space where that was happening. And that seems to have continued ever since. And so I came up with this idea called the open source landscape, where it's constantly changing. So as people tend it, and you can see how beautifully it's being taken care of and designed, that it changes. Its appearance is a function of its participants. And that will hopefully continue forever. It's part of the park, so hopefully it has some long-term future. And it's open to anyone who wants to help out and participate and be part of that community. So I'm very, very happy and very, very moved by the fact that it's still going. And thank you to all of you, Sharon and David in particular, and all the others who've put so much time and love into this landscape and are continuing to do so. And hopefully this model can be exported. I'm trying to do something similar here in New York on the roof of the new school where I work as a professor, because this project has now gotten people interested in locally sourced materials for art and craft and whatever else. So thanks all of you, and particularly Sharon and David. So yeah, I'd open it up to questions or comments from anyone.
I want to just point out a couple of things before I move down the hill.
Okay.
Thank you for all of that, Oliver, and I'm really excited to hear what happens with the next project in New York. Yeah, we could just talk for hours, you and I. I do want to just point out the daylily here. So you were responsible for so there's some plantings here I want to point out as we go that are a part of the original from 20 years ago. Nice. So what we see here, the daylily, has become over the years my very favorite material for teaching rope making. And somebody asked me several months back how many people I figured we had taught how to make rope using materials from the garden. There's David. And I think it is absolutely within reason to say that we have taught 8,000 to 10,000 people over the last 15 years how to make rope.
That's amazing. That is
Right?
amazing. You know,
I know, like,
yeah.
Yeah, so just, you know, when we think about the scope and the scale that this garden has been able to have impact for, and then the other thing I'll just point out when we think about, like, you know, what was and what is, so there's the tea bush that's right in here, how beautiful and big it is now. It actually is ready for a harvest. Red Sarah has been in the past really fantastic at getting tea made for us with that. And so we've had some beautiful teas that we've been able to drink thanks to Red Sarah. And the yuccas that are in there are also the original yuccas that were planted.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. And then what I'm kind of super excited about right now is the twin berries that have just been put in here. They were put in like 2 years ago and they are taking off. So I didn't want to put the twin berry down the hill where the other berries are because I was afraid of people thinking they were food plants. So anyway, it's great to have them up here in the dye bed section. And I had the camera on for a few moments of the maps that we've made. Those maps we made last year with Neighborhood Matching Fund support. And that was like a huge endeavor of having a drone fly overhead and getting still photos from that drone footage. Nice. And then David drawing almost like coloring book style outlines and labeling what was where. And we have spreadsheets now that go with those 5 maps. And on those spreadsheets, we've been able to track the stewardship tasks, the harvesting schedules, what things can be made with. So, you know, we realized that we've got 15 years of learning about the plants on site. That's such a particular nuance relative to what other people might know in gardening. And it just became this succession plan of like, how do we kind of help educate new gardeners so that they can find their way into the garden? And even if somebody is stepping in to know, what do I need to do this month? What are the top notes of things that need to happen in the month of May, for instance? So,
Sharon,
so excited to get that going.
Sharon?
Yes.
This is Vanessa. Hi.
Hi, Vanessa.
I'm cooking in my kitchen, so I've taken my eyes off the screen momentarily. Did you say you have maps in the garden?
Maps. The maps are inside the shed.
Okay.
They're not up for public consumption, and that's a whole other really interesting conversation that we can get into. Oliver can speak a little bit to his initial ideas about not having name labels on things. My discovery is that when we have names on when we have names on plants for the general public, our plant theft skyrockets.
Right.
So we have that access now, but we limit who that access goes to. Somebody like yourself as a neighborhood community participant who I know now is in the garden every day, I'd be happy to share those files with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Because I do take friends. I walk through there and I look at things and I don't always know what I'm seeing. And when I take friends for walks and I show them, and it would be marvelous to share some of that info. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Just remind me on that. And they are quite beautiful. It feels like at some point they should be made into coloring books. Was one of the things we thought about, like, oh, could we do like a coloring book project? Uh, so, you know, future thoughts. I'm going to show here, I'm going to back up and show what we refer to as the wedding arbor. And there's David, everybody.
Oh.
So David, can you tell us what you've got and where it's come from?
Oh, this is an Empress wood horn made from MOP garden Empress wood. Harvested from a flat tree right there. Possibly
Nice.
this tree right here. Original plantings in old garden.
That's fantastic.
Ta-da!
That's so cool. That makes me
You
happy.
can see. You want to see up here? This is a 2-year-old water shoot going for its 3rd year, on account of the perfection of its shape. It's as close to optimal as it gets. Nice and straight, nice curve at the bottom to flare into a high functioning bell. That's grade A lumber for me. I mean,
That's
in my book.
awesome. That's awesome. You know, so for those of you who are wondering about these trees, the Empress tree or the Princess tree, or here or the Polonia, they're blooming now in New York. That you know, they grow in the cracks in the subway, you know, the overpasses, and so the seeds from all those trees came from the 2 trees in Thornton Park in front of the VIA station, right? So years and years ago, I was walking around there in May, and there was this incredible blue, sort of purpley blue flowers, and people were getting off the train, and they were just like, oh my God, like we're in the tropics, right? So, and those 2 trees, I think they were gifted by, they came from China, like when the train station was built, like in the 1800s. And I've always admired them. And then I figured out how to propagate them, which is actually quite easy because they're kind of invasive. And they're almost like milkweeds. They have these tiny little seeds in a big pod. And so all the Polonias that David has been tending so carefully and using for these amazing instruments are originally from Thornton Park. And there's also some big ones in Cottonwood. Now, this is a tree that really benefits from harvesting. Traditionally in Japan, where it's called kiri, which is originally where it's from. It's from East Asia. It was planted at the birth of a daughter. So you'd plant a Polonia or Empress tree, and then you know, by the time she was ready to leave the house, the tree would be cut down and made into a traditional cabinet for kimonos. So it's a very fast-growing tree, very light wood, very beautiful flowers. It has a lot of uses. And what David is doing there is called coppicing, which is managing the tree by cutting it down, which sounds counterintuitive, but all of the trees there, or most of them anyways, the Empress trees and the willows and hazels, they were all there to be harvested, and they grow better when you cut them, which sounds crazy, but these are all selected for that reason. And so by harvesting them, David is managing to get, you know, a material that will be available forever. I mean, the more you harvest it, the more it grows. And there are coppice woodlots in Europe, like in England, that are 1,000 years old. So you actually create a strange sort of eternal youth to a tree if you coppice it. I mean, certain kinds of trees, the trees that appreciate that. And they live much longer than an uncoppiced tree. I was in a coppice woodland in England of linden trees that were over 1,000 years old. So this is an ancient technique. First Nations did this extensively. Also here on the East Coast, there was ash trees were coppiced for, and still are, for basket making. But the Polonia is really loves coppicing. So good on you, David. You took care of those trees really well. And did you plant any new ones, or are these still the original ones?
Down at Trillium Park, we've planted new ones, but these are the original ones. Let me
Okay.
point out something. Let me point out one little detail over here, because there's nuance. There was 3 trees planted originally, and they're all represented. But this one over here to the north, it got strimmed by some enthusiastic string trimmer really early on when Sharon and I were engaged here at first.
Yeah.
So it got barked on the bottom, debarked, and it had to come back from the root. So you'll notice I've just finally pollarded it up there for the first time. And, and after years of experience, it's taught me that a high pollard is better for the 1,000 monkeys test.
What is that test? What does that mean?
The 1,000 monkeys test means that when you create a pretty place, there's going to be 1,000 primates climbing on it every season. So having a low pollard is actually dangerous because the fresh shoots get handled.
Right.
And so I go high. I can reach that on my ladder, no problem. And the wood is light enough to pick off in a harvest.
That's really brilliant. So pollarding is when you trim the tree high, and coppicing is when you cut it right down to the ground. So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, pollarding was done traditionally to keep animals from eating the tree, you know, like a willow tree. They like the young shoots. So since we have human animals, it sort of has the same effect. So that's great. So really what, David, you're doing is urban forestry, right? And
that's
the fact that you can,
urban adaptation forestry.
And you don't have to go to Home Depot to buy unsustainable wood. You're growing it right there. And that was my vision. I was very much hoping that this is the kind of thing that you know we would continue and perfect. Oh, somebody's screen sharing here. Who's that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so that's really cool. So the urban forestry thing, I mean, this isn't something that has been done very widely. The thought originally was like, could we, I mean, why not grow material like wood where we use it instead of like importing it, right? And so this is just so delightful. Originally, these trees and bushes and things were all chosen for their harvestability. But since I'm not a guy who makes that much stuff, I'm more a plant guy for growing things. I kind of guessed, right? So the Paulownia I knew was useful, but I had not in my wildest dreams ever hoped that somebody like David would come along and really use them in a way that was just completely innovative. So I'm so happy about that. Early on, we had a willow guy, Alistair Heseltine, who supplied a lot of the original willows and their traditional basket willows. And he showed us how to make big baskets and chairs, but the Paulownia just ups it to a whole other level.
So I want to just point out here, because this is something we get asked about all the time. And when I think about the things that have happened in the garden under our stewardship, I think it's one of the best moves that we've ever made. David had the notion early on, I think in our like maybe 2010, that we could, instead of coppicing all of the willow at the ground, if we or at the kind of hip height, so the stalks, can you point, David, at where the stumps are?
These
where
are the original stumps.
Yeah, so everything was getting cut back at that point, but those knuckles would be this huge shrub that would take up all of the surrounding land for the willow. And so there was no way to kind of navigate in this space around the willow. And David had the notion of, what if we keep 2 willow rods on each and kind of connect them and just weave them to the other and make an arch and see if they graft.
First one here.
So
Number 1.
that's the first one. And what it's meant is that we end up having the crop overhead, and it takes way more time to harvest because there's a lot of ladder work. But in the summertime, when it's hot, this space is this beautiful, shady, cool space to be underneath all of the willow. And then in summertime or in the wintertime, we've harvested it and there's sun on the hillside in the spring, like right now. That's so great. that was just, and it's just such a beautiful sculptural piece. I've heard local teenagers refer to this as the eyelash hill.
Well, because they look like eyelashes?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And
that's great. That's so beautiful. It really is great to see them grafted together like that too, because I mean, that's the cool thing about these materials is they are generative. Like they get, you get more over time, not less. I mean, it's like the opposite of like, iron ore or oil, right? This
Right.
eats carbon dioxide and light and creates materials. So
And
it's really beautiful.
this is we call it the beach. So this is a flat zone. This was, I think, the first year of the pandemic. David and I were spending a lot of time in the garden, and
Nice.
we had excess sticks and branches that we weren't weaving with. And so that hillside had been such a challenge to try and navigate. It was just a space that we weren't really doing anything with. So David cut an additional kind of trench where his feet are there to just give a flatter space for walking,
Nice.
which is kind of the ongoing work that we've done here over the years, is just making the garden more traversable with better footpaths, because it is such a steep hill. So that is basically just like a big hugelkultur, although it's not planted, but it's just like sticks filled in with green waste and wood chips, and it's got this woven edge side that is with hazel and willow from, of course, the garden.
That's wonderful.
And it's meant that we can actually, now we've got this lovely flat spot that we can have picnics with stewards. This hill is used a lot by community groups, I've noticed. And it also gives us a raised platform that makes it easier to actually clip the willow up above. You can stand there now and do some of that work again. So it was just like, oh, that is just like a win-win in so many ways.
That's great. You see, and this is what's so great about these spaces is, like, we at the beginning really didn't understand how things would go. Like, I mean, there was a very basic, yes, we have to plant the things on contour because that's just how you do things on a hill. And we had some rudimentary paths which weren't really all that great. But to see this evolve in a way that suits the harvesting and also the access, like for folks who, because it really was a difficult space to navigate. It was so steep, and I was always falling into the hazel trees, when I was touring them. And so this is a sort of, this is something that urban planners don't really understand. They don't understand how everyday people can design a landscape in a very efficient and beautiful way over time as the need arises, right? So you saw this problem, you put your heads together, you figured it out, and came up with this elegant solution, which I had never thought of, right? So the idea is that this can continue to evolve, and then, this is what I mean by open source landscape. There is a sort of wisdom in the kind of community to do things like this as you interact with the land, right? And it's not all designed at the beginning by some like professional person, right? So it's kind of a radical idea in terms of planning and architecture, because we're so like fixated on like, wow, what are you going to do? Like, how is this all going to work out? And to have like one kind of professional person in charge. And this is the same thing here with community gardens in New York. Like they just evolve. They're constantly changing, and yet they're very efficient and very thought through landscapes, but they evolve incrementally, right? And this is what's so great to see here, that you guys really have solved all these problems, and there'll be more problems, and I know you'll figure them out, right? Or whoever,
Totally. So the ashes, for instance, they started shading out so the ashes right in front of us started shading out the fruit crops a couple of years ago. And Ryan Vasseur, who works with us now on maintaining the crop area and bringing that, regenerating the fruit trees and this lower part of the hill, he was like, can we cut those down, or can we do something with them? And it's like, oh, fantastic timing. Let's coppice them and do an experiment on working with ash bark and basketry. So, as you mentioned, they were traditionally coppiced. Now we have these poles or rods that we can be harvesting and using for basketry every year or two.
Nice. That's what they were for. They were a little slow growing. They're also used for hockey sticks traditionally. So
that's tough wood.
Yeah, really good. Also great firewood. So I'm glad that they took a long time to really get going. They were one of the ones that I was worried about.
Yeah. I wanted to also just comment that the steps that are, I think of them as being the spine of the garden that come down amongst the hazel trees. We have adapted your term of urbanite. They're, you know, the broken concrete stepstones that we can find from when construction sites are being dug up. They used to be so much easier to find, and they're really hard now. We couldn't find any last year, and we just scouted 4 and had a moto car and went and picked up. So we've got 4 new stones. But we've got so many places in the garden, and David is the master on stone laying.
Urbanite, urbanite. No, that's great stuff.
That and digging the trenches. And I'm also super excited. We've got the grape hyacinth now coming up all through in the hazel.
Nice.
And it's just so pretty to have this hillside starting to kind of be planted. Just in the last couple of years, we get this beautiful purple planted zone.
That's great.
So we're gonna walk now and go into the food crop. That's the lower half of the food forest. And we'll go into the new zone so you can see the hillside. That's the expansion. And it's the most recent project we've done over a few work sessions in April with community members, just kind of creating the next pathway of how we can help direct people of where we're hoping they'll walk.
Cool.
I'll try and be steady cam guy.
It's not bad. You know, the phone seems to be, there's a bit of an anti-shake feature in it, so it's not terrible.
I made my stick too long, so it's catching on the ground.
Oh.
It's not just you, sweetie. It's I'm new at AV equipment.
So can you just phone in on this? So we have Formium tenax that's been planted here, and this is actually
New Zealand
embarrassing because I haven't gotten down to get these grasses out around them. But of course, like, we're planting really out of their temperate zone.
We go downhill from you.
And we had such a horrible winter last year for cold. So I thought we had lost these completely. But I'm really thrilled to see that they're actually coming back. So
that's good. Yeah, they don't like cold winters. They're better in Victoria. You know, and it's interesting how with global warming, we're you know, we are getting warmer winters, but every once in a while you get a super cold one, and it does really knock things back. So that's good that they're coming back.
Yeah. So this hillside, the intention for our new hill, other than all of the raspberry canes that of course keep coming up everywhere, is to just turn this into a fiber hill.
Nice.
Got 5 or 6 formiums that are here that hopefully recover. Quite a few daylilies that are planted. Nice. And then eventually I want to get some more dogbane or Apocynon panadina here. So that's the long-term plan, is to keep it so that it's a fuller sun site as opposed to where everything is quite treed and shaded. Allow this to still kind of benefit from all the sun by having lower shrubby plants that we can be harvesting for fiber. And even like the dandelions are these beautiful long stems right now that are fantastic for weaving with. So
really? That's great.
The dandelion stems and the daffodil stems will both be harvested in the next few weeks and saved for soft basketry classes.
That's wonderful. I was just thinking, you know, Sharon, as you were talking about these sort of softer plants, there's one that we planted at the beginning that you might want to think about again. It's called Red Hot Poker or Knip Pop. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
yes,
it's common. Yeah, it's very good. For those of you who are like gardeners, as well as maybe craftspeople, it's a really good plant to have in your garden because it's like a twist tie, but it's biodegradable. So you rip off a leaf and you can tie up your, you know, vine, your pumpkin, or your bean, you know, runner bean, and then by the end of the season, the thing is rotted away. So it's called Knip-Hopfia Red Hot Pokers. Hummingbirds love them. I don't know if you have those this year, but they really like the red
Hummingbirds.
Hummingbirds, yeah. So that's a good one to try to track down. It's pretty common. I've seen it at like,
Awesome.
you know, Home Depot, places like that. So
And we just, the other thing that happens on this hillside is, and it's not, we've just done the first harvest, but behind the park bench that is midway up the hill and at the
Mhm.
bottom of the hill are red osier dogwood
Nice.
bushes that have been planted. And we coppiced those for the first time this year, and we used all of the clippings for weaving the fences on site. So
Oh,
it was
that's great.
in the past, I've been going to other city parks and getting the red osier dogwood to
Mhm.
weave the fences with. I love the red osier because I can put it in the ground and it's not going to root as quickly as the willow.
Right.
And if it, like the willow, we don't want living willow fences everywhere. That would just be insane for how much work it would be. And
Yeah.
they're water hogs, and you know, there's lots of
Yeah.
reasons why we don't want living willow fences everywhere. But the red osier dogwood is beautiful, even where it does root and bloom. It doesn't take over the bed. It doesn't hog all of the water. And I find about 25 to 30% of the stalks will root.
That's
So
great.
some of the fences stay living and we don't have to keep replacing the fences. We can just kind of weave them up again.
Nice. And it's native too, which is great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's wonderful. That's a real, and the red color is unusual. I mean, it looks so great with the yellow and green of other like willows, although it is
I
a
agree.
dogwood. Yeah, it's really nice. So that's great that you're able to get it to root too once in a while. So wonderful. Yeah, the willows really are a real mix of European willows. There's a few native willows, but it's a real wide variety. Alistair Heseltine was on Denman, I think, or Hornby, and he's a traditional British willow master of baskets, and trained a lot of us. Me less successfully than others, but I did manage to make a basket at one point, and a lot of those are from his farm.
So we're in the fruit orchard here. So the fruit orchard, and you can speak a little bit more to this, Oliver, but it was started as kind of a phase 2 of the garden.
That's right.
So what year was the food forest started?
I think it was about 3 or 4 years in. And what happened was, I mean, originally, you know, not that we're purists or anything, but we thought, well, this would be mostly about materials. But then these fruit people came and wanted to grow some fruit trees, and being an open source landscape, it seemed fine. And they were willing to take care of them and supply the trees. And so this is how these projects kind of grow, right? Very organically. And after that, I don't know what happened. So maybe you could fill it in. I mean, I know they planted them, and whether they ever came back, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, so EYA was originally taking care of this space when I got involved and David got involved. And a big part of how they maintained it was with their youth leadership time that was sponsored through federal youth training programs.
Right.
And the Harper government in 2012 basically like cut that, destroyed that program. We have BMX bikes going through the garden at the moment, which.
Oh, that's the brakes?
That's the brakes you're hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I
don't love BMX bikes going through the garden, but anyway, that's another story. So yeah, the Harper government basically cut all of the funding capacity that maintained this orchard, and EYA just did not have the capacity any longer to be on it. And so David and I, and there was really hard graft getting volunteers out here for the first number of years.
Yeah.
So a lot of it came down to what David and I were able to do with the assistance of, you know, 2 or 3 other people stepping in periodically. And then, you know, the odd time we'd get a school group or something. But so we focused on the art crops, and that was our primary goal. And then in 2016, I think, Earth Hand Gleaners officially took over the management of the garden in terms of the operating agreement from EYA. Right. And at that point, I kind of realized that all the areas that I'd been neglecting for at that point, a decade, basically became my problems. So we
Careful
are,
what you wish for.
yeah, right. So we're 3 years into the reclamation project now,
Mhm.
and that's Brian Vessier has been really, really super helpful on,
Yeah.
he's run some permaculture classes.
Oh, great.
He's brought in other permaculturalists to work with and is doing
Nice.
soil building workshops, and our stewardship team is fantastic now. And this is our favorite thing ever, is where David is standing. You can see it's actually flat.
Mm.
It's like, oh my God, we have like flat pathways now to navigate, which has also made it way easier to get community engagement, because
Yeah.
it just was super hard to get people out able to kind of move around through the site. But
Yeah,
the
it was
plum
always
trees
chaos. Yeah.
here are insane fruit providers. Holy cow.
Nice.
And the notion of recognizing it needs to be holistic, where we're not separating the food and the fiber or the materials, because honestly, that never makes sense, right? They're meant to
Right.
go together. Like
Sure.
when we're harvesting, or sorry, when we're doing the fruit tree pruning in the springtime, the wood from that is fantastic for making buttons or tool handles. So like the
Sure.
buttons on my pants are apple wood from one of these apple trees.
Nice.
And then in the autumn, we can be using all of the fruit leaves and any of the like if we prune apples in the fall. That is fantastic dye. So
Oh, really? That's
yeah.
fantastic. I didn't know that. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the wood gets used from the fruit trees for creative projects. The fruit whips that we cut off in the springtime also become used for fence weaving. So it all is of a piece, and it all belongs together in the most beautiful way imaginable.
Well, that's really interesting. You see, originally over at Cottonwood, which was started in 10 years before that, like 92, we had areas that were contaminated with heavy metals, right? We found those areas using soil testing. And so the reason that we started growing a lot of, things like timber bamboo and basket willows and stuff over there, and black locust, was to grow something in the areas that might have had too much contamination for healthy food. So then the idea was, like, a lot of those bamboos and stuff came from cottonwood originally, and so it was always considered like as a material crop. Not that you can't eat bamboo shoots; they're delicious, but we were trying to just use the areas that were contaminated. However, at Means Production, it seemed that site had not been used for industrial purposes. So other than the soil just being really bad, like in terms of like lack of nutrients, there really wasn't anything wrong with it in terms of toxicity. So it actually makes sense to have a food crop there as well. And it's nice to know that you can have all these other uses like dye and carving and all of that. So, that's really good permaculture thinking, right? So happy to hear that. I mean, it's always a holistic process. And the other thing too that to point out, I think, is as we start to get more extreme weather, you talked a little bit about the shade, which is super important, given the global heating that's going on. But also, we have these extreme rain events. I know here in the city, in New York, actually, they are really saying that garden spaces, because they are uncovered spaces, are very, very important in keeping the sewers from overflowing by absorbing water. And one of the ideas of Means of Production early on, and one of the selling points, was that by digging these planted trenches, they would suck the water up that was otherwise going to run down the hill onto Great Northern Way. So the idea that these spaces are hydrologically very important as resiliency providing spaces for climate change, right? So they suck up water, they create shade, and they reduce the urban heat island effect. And plus, they're sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. So every horn that David makes, or button that you carve, or basket that somebody makes, is carbon dioxide that's been sucked out of the air and in doing its tiny little bit to mitigate global warming. So these spaces are really, really key for that. And but you know, back in the day, we weren't really thinking in those terms of climate change so much. But as things get hotter, you know, one of the things that you've often see is that the Parks Board, you know, bless them, they usually try to do the right thing, but they often put like play equipment in the middle of a roasting field, or you know, and in a city like Vancouver, maybe it's okay, but if you get a hot summer, it's very uncomfortable to be in that kind of a space. But I know here on the East Coast, it's just unbearably hot that it's actually a health hazard to be out in the sun for more than an hour because you get dehydrated and heat stroke. So the idea of providing shaded, planted spaces for people to recreate is super important.
Yeah, and you know, that is more and more true here as well now. I'm just going to interrupt and say that I've come out of the food crop now, and I'm walking up through the wild zone, as we call it, which was, I guess, area 3 that was planted in terms of the projects that were taken on. And you referred to there being some Indigenous skill holders that came and kind of assisted on what plants to put in. I don't know if you remember who those individuals were.
Well, it was connected with the Environmental Youth Alliance. They were working with a group of Indigenous youth and also some elders who were doing work with Indigenous plants to do traditional basket work. So I think they did at one point plant some spruce in there. But there were various people coming through who were like, it was its own kind of educational program, awesome. and it was in partnership with the EYA.
Okay, so this was the area that also was being untended for a few years, and it ended up being the spot that I would say was probably the most abused of areas around the garden, because it was so wild looking. It's where people would decide that they would put pitch a tent for the night, and a tent would go down on top of existing seedlings or plants, and the Sambucus kept having its branches broken off, and the blackberry was just encroaching, and the blackberry was taking over. So it was, I think 4 years ago, I took on blackberry removal in the winter time, and I've realized how much I love pulling blackberry. It's just like the most satisfying thing imaginable. And then I started putting nettle in, because this is such a prime spot for nettle to be growing as a woodland. And so we were able to keep the blackberry at bay and get nettle happening and kind of recreate some pathways. So I think you can see where the red osier is here.
Yeah.
So these are woven about every 3 years now, and this year they were using the red osier from the site, which is super exciting.
Nice.
And we also have planted a bunch of fireweed. So we're keeping the intention of having this as being kind of a native plantings that all have use and that are all pollinator happy. And we've done a lot of work with this Mahonia for dye. Has been harvested quite regularly and used with programs at Emily Carr with the Aboriginal Gathering Place, and working with Seaswice and Jolene Andrew and Tracy Williams. Megan Inez is working with us this year. So these are all, except for Joe, is Wet'suwet'en, but the other women are all Squamish women who have joined us for different programs and have been able to be involved still on, in different capacities with this space, with the stinging nettle and some of the other plants. And I feel, especially with stinging nettle and fireweed, actually, one of the big things I feel I can do as a good land steward and plant ally, an Indigenous ally, is just like get those plants that Park Board wants to dismiss and doesn't think should be here, and have them reintroduced. And so kind of do the heavy lifting of getting those plants in and normalizing that these plants belong in a garden, that these plants belong
and in the landscape.
Here.
In the landscape. I mean, that's the thing, being the traditional territories. I know, Cease, we actually just gave a talk together about public art on unceded land, and she's great, doing amazing stuff. And this is the thing too. I mean, as we start to, deconstruct settler colonialism and create, some sort of reconciliation and create landscapes that are open to, that are not property, that are participatory landscapes. That kind of works a little bit against the sort of, settler colonialism, but also the sort of capitalism. The idea that not every space should be real estate or controlled by some sort of, hegemonic real estate type force. And this is something that I was always very committed to as an artist, is like, these spaces are for the people, and people will participate and create sustainability and community if given, given the space to do so. People do the right thing. Sometimes there's some glitches, like you said, there was problems at one point getting volunteers, and it comes and goes. But by and large, these spaces now have existed for many years. I mean, Cottonwood since '92, and this since 2002, and they're part of the urban landscape, and hopefully, also a sort of ecological reconciliation, in a sense that, all this whole environment, False Creek, the Grandview Cut, all these spaces are unceded Aboriginal land, and they were very productive spaces. And so we're trying to bringing back some of that productivity in terms of but not productivity for profit, productivity for the use of people as a commons, practice of the commons. So there was an artist by the name of Gordon Ingram, who's First Nations. He's based on Salt Spring, but his family's from this area, and he's helped me a lot in the sort of, looking at the traditional use patterns of False Creek. And it is sort of tragic that beautiful estuary was completely filled in with trash, and now it's like the industrial zone, So this idea of imagining what it could look like as a more healthy ecology is really vital, and the First Nations are a huge part of that, and basically as the people who have the Aboriginal title of the land are really really key players, and they've come and gone in terms of this project, but it's constantly open to participation, and my hope is that it'll just expand and continue, and also the Parks Board is now becoming much more it was interesting how hard these projects were at the beginning. There's a lot of pushback from parks because this is so weird. Why would you? They're used to having a sculpture, an artist does a public artwork, and people, they pay for it, and everybody is happy. They cut a ribbon and it's done. But this is never done. This is a work in progress, and you guys are doing this, and the people who work with you, and it's somebody else, and maybe 30 years will come along. So this is never a fait accompli. It's this dynamic process, and it's always going to change and be open to the community. So that was a very hard thing for the folks at the Parks Board to wrap their head around, and they did eventually. And to their credit, Jill and Susan and the rest of them, eventually became comfortable. And I think I made them a little uncomfortable at first, but you guys made them more comfortable, which is great. And so now this opens up opportunities for these things to kind of hopefully spread, into other parts of the city.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the huge shifts that I've really noticed happen since I got involved here in 2007, is how now that notion of the maintenance plan is the community engagement, and the stewardship is the education and the learning opportunity, right? Yeah. That there's a real shift in thinking, and that extending a timeline of how we think about how things need to happen and the timeline of how things need to happen. And that is, to me, core part of the decolonizing our thinking, right? Like getting away from this needs to happen in this 6-month window, and then the final report is going to go in. And it's like, no, that's not the way things happen. So
Big long arc and cyclical, seasonal thinking, passing generations thinking, you know?
Absolutely. No, that's and that you guys have should get a lot of credit for that. I mean, I think that's the idea of multi-generational thinking and succession too. Like because the landscape has changed, it has to be maintained, but some things are going to change. You know, like you said, with the ash trees, I mean, it's been 20 years and now they're ready, right? They weren't ready for a long time. Whereas, you know, things like the daylilies are ready right away. So these kind of, the timescape is very important, and it requires a certain kind of mind. And unfortunately, the way, you know, grants and city programs work, they tend to always have like, they were always at the beginning like, when is this going to be done? And it's like, never. And well, you have to write a report, and it's like, well, it's happening, but I don't know how it's going to work out. And it was like so mind blowing, like because it just was this endless thing. And also the fact that I didn't know who was going to get involved, and you know, things were going to go up and down, and there were problems, you know, at times with maintenance. We had periods of time when people threw a lot of garbage around, and this is a huge problem in the gardens as well. But it's also a problem in public parks. I mean, you know, the syringes and whatnot, and homeless folks, that's a whole other thing. I mean, you know, it's not going away. It's not like you can wish, you know, this is a structural problem with late capitalism. It's too expensive to live in cities. So a lot of folks fall off the ladder and wind up living outdoors. And that's not our fault. I mean, but it becomes a very interesting issue of community sort of responsibility, is how do you deal with folks who really don't have a lot of other options, right?
Yeah, and needing to just shifting our expectations, right?
Yeah.
Hazel Ward, in a talk that I was listening to that they gave earlier this year, shared a Welsh saying that I love, and my ancestry is Welsh, so I was particularly smitten with this. The saying is, everything to do, nothing to get done. And that
that's beautiful.
So sums up what this work is, right? Like there's everything to do, but nothing to get done. But I'm aware of what our time is, that we are just now at the 5 o'clock mark. So I'm going to switch the camera again because and visually say goodbye. But I want to show you this next phase of work that we are taking on. So here is the hillside. So we're on the far western edge now. Nice. You might remember at one point there were bees that were kept here by EYA back in the mid-aughts. So we have a little soil building site there. Nice. And we've got a fence woven to just kind of try and delineate, stop people from basically jumping into the nettle patch. Mm-hmm. And this is where, this was all blackberry that we are in the process of removing and kind of cutting back. And my hope is to get fireweed going. And so we will just have this beautiful fireweed hill in time, as well as keep a footpath here that will give us kind of a side artery when we want to shut off the nettle path area in the middle of the summer. Mm-hmm. But we've planted a couple of sumacs now on site. Nice. I'm super excited about. And so in with the sumacs are asters and goldenrod, and some camas, and some of the native buttercup that accompanies the camas, and then there's roses and ferns in there. And then when I think about, like, you know, planting for the future, our 30 years down the road, I don't know if this little guy is going to make it yet, but if we get to have a conversation again in a decade, we can check in. Nice. Well, this is an Osage Orange seedling that somebody started from seed, who is a bow maker. Ryan Gauthier is a bow maker, and we gave him some hazel for making bows from the garden. And he gave us in exchange some seedlings that he had started of
Nice.
some Osage Orange, which is such a beautiful dyewood and traditional bowwood. So when we think about growing for the future, maybe there will be some bowyer in town that will actually be able to make something, or dyers working with Osage Orange.
Yeah, and it may grow better too. That sort of a small tree, it really likes the heat. It's more native to places like the Midwest and even Southern Ontario, where like you get these roasting humid summers. So if you get more of these roasting humid summers, which you may very well get with climate change, those kinds of things will start to do better. And so that's the kind of long view as well, right? Like with climate change, you're going to start having some changes. And it's not obvious exactly how it's going to shake out because there's a lot of chaos. You know, there might be some colder winters or some hotter summers, but the trend is in the hot direction. So you may find that Osage Orange really just takes off. And it's the same with the Polonia. Like it never used to do that well. But as the lower mainland gets hotter, it's doing better. Right. And it loves the heat. Like, I mean, in New York, it just grows everywhere like a weed. And it originally came here from crates. When porcelain was shipped from China, the porcelain was packed in Polonia fluff. And when they opened the crates on the port in Brooklyn, the little fluff started blowing all around. And now we have Polonia everywhere. So it's a kind of a beautiful story of immigration, but it's considered invasive here, but not in the Pacific Northwest because it doesn't tend to seed out that much. But it's a lovely tree, but you may find it growing better once you start getting more hot weather.
Awesome. Well, I think we've done a full lap around the garden now.
Yeah, you must be exhausted.
Yeah. I know. I wish my step counter actually counted the steps up and down the hill.
I know,
like
they should be worth twice as much.
All right. Thank you so much for today, Oliver.
It's a pleasure.
Fantastic.
And thank you so much for the last 20 years. You know, that's really what matters here is, you know, here I am in old NYC, but you're doing all the work there. And I'm hoping to get there maybe in July briefly. I'm, you know, because of COVID, I wasn't able to travel back and forth, but my dream is to get back to the West Coast for a little while and see you guys. And I always love going back to these projects and going, wow, I can't believe it. It's like so amazing. You know, it was growing in a jar, and now it's this giant tree.
I mention you all the time when I'm talking about like where those kind of turning points in my life as an artist have been.
We name drop you all the time.
Finding the means of production garden. I truly, I cannot say enough what a game changer this was for me, as I think both as a human being, primarily even how I've learned to slow down and to think about time and my relationship to place, and to being able to ground and root myself here. And if I go on much longer, I'll start crying. So I'll stop there, but I truly, I cannot overstate how impactful this garden has been to myself. And I know so many others that feel the same way. So thank you.
Well, thank you again, guys. That's very moving, and it's so good to hear because it means it was worth it, and continues to be so. So I'm very moved by that, and thank you for all your amazing hard work and care and love, and hopefully this place will be around in another 100 years and 100 years after that. There's no reason why not, right? So you're training. You're not only are you doing stuff, but you're training others, which is even more important. So All right. I will record. I will send you the link to the recording, and have a lovely afternoon for you guys. Okay. And thanks again. That was really wonderful. Bye, everyone. Nice to see you all. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your work, the both of you, the three of you. So appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.